At midnight on December 15th, 1900, a passing ship looked toward a lighthouse in the North Atlantic. The light was out. 11 days later, a relief crew found the station prepared for another night. Clean lamps, filled oil, machinery ready. But the 3 men assigned to keep that light alive had vanished. No bodies were ever recovered. No witness ever described the moment they disappeared. And behind the story most people remember lies another mystery. How much of the haunting version was ever real?
You've just opened a file that should have stayed closed.
To understand why this disappearance lasted for more than a century, you have to begin with the place itself. Aileen Moor was a small, exposed island in the Flannan Isles, west of Lewis in Scotland. There was no village, no harbor, no easy escape. Only rock, wind, and the North Atlantic. The lighthouse had been lit for the first time only a year earlier. Its purpose was simple: guide ships safely through dangerous water. But keeping that light alive required discipline. Every lamp had to be cleaned, every reservoir filled, every detail recorded. In December 1900, 3 men were stationed there. James Ducat was the principal keeper. Thomas Marshall was his assistant. Donald MacArthur was an occasional keeper, filling in for a colleague on sick leave. They were not strangers to the sea, and they were not supposed to disappear. By the evening of Saturday, December 15th, the light should have been visible far beyond the Flannan Isles. Its job was simple. Once darkness fell, the beam had to warn ships moving through the North Atlantic. But that night, something in the routine had already failed. Near midnight, a passing steamship moved through poor weather near the islands. The vessel was later identified as the Archtor. Its crew looked toward Aileen Moor. They could not see the lighthouse light. At the time, it was only an observation. The report did not bring help to the island that night. There was no radio connection between the lighthouse and Lewis. No one on shore could call the keepers, and no one on Aileen Moor could ask for help. The relief tender Hesperus was meant to visit the station, but severe weather delayed any landing. The island remained out of reach. Behind its closed doors, the lighthouse stood alone, and the silence continued. 11 days passed between the night the light was not seen and the moment anyone reached the lighthouse. 11 days of wind, salt, and open sea. By the time the Hesperus finally approached Aileen Moor, the question was no longer why the light had gone dark. It was whether anyone was left to answer. On December 26th, the Hesperus reached Aileen Moor for its routine relief. This was normally a practical, familiar moment. A signal flag should have been flying, supplies should have been waiting near the landing, and at least one keeper should have appeared above the path. But from the ship, Captain Harvey saw nothing move. Captain Harvey sounded the steam whistle, then the siren. The sound crossed the water and struck the cliff beneath the lighthouse. Still, no one came out. No signal appeared. Finally, a rocket was fired into the grey sky. It was meant to force an answer from the station. The island answered with nothing. Joseph Moore, the relieving keeper, climbed ashore at the east landing and made his way toward the station. The gate was closed, the outer doors were closed, and inside, the clock had stopped. There was no fire burning in the rooms. The beds were empty. The lighthouse was not waiting for him. Moore ran back to report what he had seen. Then he returned with men from the Hesperus to search the station properly. In the lamp room, The lens and machinery had been cleaned. The oil fountain was full, and the lamp was ready to be lit for another night. But there was no sign of James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, or Donald MacArthur. The kitchen had been cleaned and put in order. The work from that morning had been completed. These were not the marks of a station abandoned days earlier in chaos. They were the final traces of a routine, ending exactly where it should, which meant the men had most likely disappeared later that afternoon. At first, the mystery seemed to be inside the lighthouse, but the strongest clue was waiting far below it. At the western landing, the sea had left evidence of a force none of the men could have controlled. The western landing was not a safe harbor. It was a narrow path carved into the rock, exposed directly to the Atlantic. Below the lighthouse, a crane platform stood high above the water, and even there, the sea had reached places it should not have reached. A wooden box used to hold mooring ropes and equipment had been secured far up the route. It was gone. The ropes had been torn from it and scattered across the rocks below. But there was one detail investigators could not ignore. The coils had not been untied. The iron railings around the crane platform had been bent and torn from their foundations. A heavy block of stone had been moved down onto the path. Even a life buoy, fixed to the railings for emergencies, had been ripped away, not cut loose, taken by the force of the sea. Inside the lighthouse, 2 sets of outdoor gear were missing. Ducat's sea boots and waterproof coat were gone. Marshall's sea boots and oilskins were gone too. But MacArthur's ordinary coat had been left behind. Joseph Moore believed that meant he may have rushed outside without full protection. The evidence suggested a sudden emergency. Something below the lighthouse had demanded attention, but the crane itself was still secure, and there was no proof that the men had been working on it. So why had all 3 of them gone down? The official investigation would later offer its answer. The 3 keepers may have gone down to inspect the damage or secure equipment before it was lost. Then an unexpected wave, a large roller, came higher than anyone expected, and in one moment, the sea may have taken all 3 men. The investigation did not find a hidden room. It did not find signs of violence, and it did not find evidence that anyone else had reached the island. What it found was damage and a pattern. Something powerful had struck the western landing. The question was whether the keepers had gone down before it happened. Superintendent Robert Muirhead arrived 3 days later. He examined the station, the paths, the damaged railings, and the equipment left below the lighthouse. At the eastern landing, everything was still in place. But on the west side, the sea had torn through the route with enormous force. That difference mattered. Muirhead believed the men had gone down to secure the rope box before more equipment was lost. Ducat and Marshall had put on the clothing they normally wore near the landings. MacArthur had not. His coat was still inside. That suggested he may not have planned to go down at all. He may have followed after the others when something went wrong. Muirhead did not think the men had been blown away by the wind. The direction of the storm did not support it. Instead, he imagined something more sudden. A large roller rising above the landing, a wall of water moving over the rocks, then pulling back toward the sea. It was a logical conclusion. The ropes were gone, the railings were twisted, the life buoy had been torn away more than 100 feet above the sea. The weather had left physical proof of what it could do. But it still could not explain the final seconds. There were no witnesses, no recovered bodies, no final message. Only an official answer built from weather, wreckage, and absence. And over time, That absence made room for a different story. Over the years, the disappearance became more than a case file. It became a scene people could picture. A table set for a meal, one chair knocked over, a door left open. Images repeated so often, they began to feel like evidence. The source of those images was not the official investigation. It was a poem. In 1912, Wilfred Wilson Gibson published Flannan Isles, a dramatic retelling written 12 years after the keepers vanished. It introduced the case to a much larger audience, and it gave the mystery its most famous version. The surviving account from the relief crew is quieter. It describes lamps trimmed and ready, the lens and machinery cleaned, the kitchen tidied, 2 sets of outdoor clothing missing, but no frozen meal, no overturned chair, no scene of sudden panic. Another layer of the legend came from supposed diary entries. Stories began circulating about fear, storms, prayer, and men who seemed to sense something coming. But the original Lighthouse logbook is not held in the National Records of Scotland. What does survive is far more ordinary. Formal entries ended on December 13th. Routine observations continued on a slate until the 15th. That does not make the real case less unsettling. It makes it more restrained. There was no confirmed supernatural warning, no final message from the men, only evidence that they had completed their work, then gone outside. After that, the record simply ends. Still, removing the legends does not close the file. It leaves one question untouched. If Ducat and Marshall went down to inspect the western landing, why did MacArthur follow? What could have happened in those final seconds that made all 3 men leave the safety of the lighthouse? The hardest part of this case is not imagining a wave. The western landing proved the sea had enough force to tear iron from stone. The hardest part is the order of events. 2 men left wearing the gear used for the landings. A third appears to have followed in haste, without full protection. Muirhead's reconstruction was simple. Ducat and Marshall may have gone down to check the damage or secure equipment before it disappeared. Then MacArthur may have noticed something wrong. A shout, a fallen rope, a sudden wave below the path. Whatever made him follow, he did not have time to prepare. A wave does not need minutes to become fatal. On an exposed cliff path, it can arrive in seconds. One man could have been knocked down, another could have tried to pull him back, and the third may have stepped into danger, trying to help. Other explanations have been suggested over the years. Some imagined a fight. Others suggested foul play, escape, or something supernatural. But none of those theories came with physical evidence from the island. There was no confirmed intruder, no recovered message, no trace that proved a different ending. That is why the Flannan Isles mystery has never truly disappeared. The evidence points toward the sea, but evidence cannot preserve a final decision. It cannot tell us who stepped outside first, or what made the other 2 follow. And that missing moment is where the file remains open. More than a century later, the lighthouse no longer depends on 3 men climbing its stairs each night. In 1971, Flannan Isles became an automatic light. The beam still flashes across the Atlantic. But on December 15th, 1900, there was no one left to light it. The official record gives the most likely answer, probably drowning. A sudden wave, a damaged landing, and 3 men caught in a place where the sea had already shown its strength. It is the explanation that fits the evidence best, but it is still an explanation built from what was left behind. That morning, the lamps were cleaned. The oil was full. The kitchen had been put in order. Then, sometime that afternoon, 3 experienced keepers left the safety of the station. No one recorded why. No one saw them again. The sea may have taken them in seconds. That is the most likely answer. But likelihood is not certainty. The last decision they made was never witnessed. The final words they spoke were never recorded. And so, more than a century later, the file remains open. What do you believe is the most likely explanation? Leave your theory below. Subscribe, and the next file will be waiting.
Another file is waiting to be opened.